Gaetano Mosca on the ruling class and moral decline. Before we delve further into this exploration of Gaetano Mosca's views on the ruling class, allow me to offer a brief reminder. If any part of this discussion resonates with you, perhaps a striking historical anecdote or an insightful revelation, please consider recommending the episode to others who share an interest in political history and ensuring you return for future updates. Your engagement is invaluable and enables us to continue delivering thoughtful content on these enduring topics. Let's talk about the ideas of Gaetano Mosca from his major work, The Ruling Class. We're unpacking his core view on what he calls the ruling class, drawing straight from his analysis of political life across history. We'll explore why he sees minority rule as an unchangeable fact, how ruling groups justify their position, and what that means for things like law, armies, and representation. Along the way, we'll reason through the logic of why attempts at enforced redistribution under systems like Marxism, Communism, or Bolshevism rely on violence in ways that clash with moral standards of voluntary exchange and informed consent, often setting the stage for imbalance, decline, and degeneration over generations. Before getting into the finer details, let's step back and consider the big picture Mosca lays out. He observes that human societies, no matter how simple or advanced, always divide into those who direct affairs and those who follow. This isn't some temporary glitch or a product of bad luck. It's a constant tendency rooted in how people organize. A small group coordinates effectively, controls key resources or forces like military strength or wealth, and guides the larger, less organized mass. This setup holds whether the outward form is monarchy, republic, or anything else. The logic here is straightforward. Coordination gives an edge, and the larger a group gets, the harder it becomes for everyone to align without some smaller nucleus taking the lead. Societies that ignore this dynamic risk chaos, but those that manage it through structure can achieve stability and progress, though never perfect equality of control. Now, diving deeper into Mosca's reasoning, start with the inevitability of the ruling class itself. In every political organism, from the earliest organized groups to modern nations, two classes appear. A less numerous one that performs all political functions, monopolizes power, and enjoys its advantages, while the more numerous one is directed and controlled by the first. The minority rules through better organization, acting in concert with shared understanding, while the majority remains fragmented and easier to handle individually. Logically, as societies grow larger, the proportion of rulers to ruled shrinks further, making unified pushback from the majority even less feasible. This isn't about superior birth or innate traits alone. It's about practical organization and control of social forces such as military valor, property, religion, or knowledge. Hereditary elements can stabilize a ruling group by passing on habits and networks, but without circulation, bringing in fresh talent from below when new sources of wealth or influence emerge, the group risks stagnation and eventual replacement through internal weakness or external pressure. A key part of Mosca's logic is how ruling minorities never rely on naked force alone. They rest on what he terms the political formula, a legal and moral principle or doctrine that justifies their authority in the eyes of the governed. This formula answers a deep social need. People require governance not just through raw power but on the basis of some accepted moral or rational ground, whether supernatural beliefs in earlier societies or seemingly rational concepts like sovereignty in later ones. No one has seen a divine document granting rule to certain families, nor does even the broadest suffrage truly express the unfiltered will of a majority in practice. Yet these formulas persist because they fulfill a psychological and cohesive role, turning obedience into something felt as rightful rather than mere submission. The formula varies by civilization type, shared beliefs, customs, and instincts, but its function is constant. It legitimizes the organized minority's dominion over the unorganized majority. Building on that, Mosca emphasizes juridical defense as essential for higher civilization. This means strong habits and institutions that curb arbitrary power through the rule of law, due process, and checks on whims. It depends on balancing multiple social forces: wealth, military, religion, education, labor, so none dominates tyrannically. A large middle stratum with moderate property holdings fosters independence, recruits talent, and prevents extremes of poverty or monopoly. Separation of competing forces like church and state further guards against absolutism. Without this balance, over-centralization breeds resentment and upheaval. Logically, the level of juridical defense rises with diversity of recognized forces and control over nature, correlating with overall societal vitality. Societies weaken when one force asserts itself unchecked, as history shows in cases where feudal decentralization gave way to bureaucratic overreach or when military elements overwhelmed civil authority. On military power specifically, Mosca reasons that it poses the greatest risk of usurpation because violence is primitive and direct. Early societies blend fighting with all males. Feudal eras tie it to local warriors. But modern standing armies mark progress by professionalizing and subordinating force to civil power. Sharp distinctions between officers, drawn from and reflecting the ruling class's balance, and enlisted ranks channel military energy productively, preventing it from becoming an independent partisan actor. Democratizing armies too far risks turning them into reflections of social conflicts, inviting dictatorship. The logic: organized military under balanced civil oversight protects the whole without devolving into local tyrannies or endless strife, though failures here, as in declining empires, accelerate decay. Mosca applies the same realist lens to representative systems and suffrage. Pure majority rule is illusory. Even with universal voting, organized minorities, parties, elites, networks impose their will on the disorganized mass. Voters don't truly choose in isolation. Candidates or their allies mobilize, persuade, and lead. What appears as popular sovereignty masks the same minority dominion seen elsewhere. He critiques over-reliance on democratic myths for fostering demagoguery and short-termism, but sees balanced representation as potentially superior when it allows circulation, expresses varied forces, and maintains juridical checks. Aristocratic tendencies, stability, tradition, must temper democratic ones, mobility, renewal, to avoid fossilization or mob excess. Logically, absolutizing any formula, whether monarchical or majoritarian, subordinates everything to one unchecked source, risking oppression. Turning to broader phenomena like revolution and collectivist experiments, Mosca derives constants from accumulated facts. Revolutions stem from imbalances, over-bureaucratization, or failed formulas, rarely succeeding long-term without elite direction. On systems like Marxism, Communism, or Bolshevism, which promise enforced redistribution to erase classes, he reasons they cannot abolish hierarchy. Instead, they displace one ruling group with another, typically a bureaucratic or technocratic elite controlling the state apparatus. The appeal lies in sentiments of equality and justice, but ignoring organizational realities and human tendencies toward grouping and leadership leads to new monopolies on power. Enforced measures require violence or coercion to seize and redistribute resources, disrupting voluntary exchanges based on mutual agreement. This violence, presented as protection for the many against the few, installs a formula claiming moral high ground but rests on compulsion rather than informed, voluntary consent. Here the contrast sharpens through logic. Moral standards of voluntary exchange demand interactions where parties engage knowingly, without duress, each pursuing benefit through consent. Think trade, contracts, or associations formed freely. Informed consent requires full awareness of terms, risks, and alternatives, not habitual acceptance of myths or fear of force. Mosca's analysis shows political rule inherently deviates. Majorities acquiesce to formulas through social conditioning and psychological need, not deliberate, informed choice. The organized minority wields power, including the threat or use of violence, to maintain order, claiming it shields society from anarchy or worse alternatives. Yet this justification falters against consent standards. It's imposed, not opted into. Enforced redistribution amplifies the issue. It violates voluntary property arrangements by coercive seizure, installing a new elite whose formula masks the coercion as collective good. Over time, such violence erodes juridical defense by concentrating forces, slowing circulation as the new bureaucracy entrenches, and fostering dependency that degenerates initiative and balance. Historical patterns confirm the constant. Unbalanced power leads to decay, fossilization, revolts, or foreign vulnerability, because it violates the logic of diverse forces checking one another. For current and future generations, repeated cycles of violent redistribution promise equality but deliver new dominions, weakening the middle ground of voluntary cooperation and informed participation that sustains vitality. Degeneracy follows as talent stagnates, resentment builds without outlets, and formulas lose persuasive force, inviting collapse rather than renewal. To illustrate these points directly, consider Mosca's own words on the ruling dynamic. In all societies, from societies that are very meagerly developed and have barely attained the dawnings of civilization, down to the most advanced and powerful societies, two classes of people appear, a class that rules and a class that is ruled. The first class, always the less numerous, performs all political functions, monopolizes power and enjoys the advantages that power brings, whereas the second, the more numerous class, is directed and controlled by the first. On the organized minority's edge. In reality, the dominion of an organized minority, obeying a single impulse over the unorganized majority, is inevitable. The power of any minority is irresistible as against each single individual in the majority, who stands alone before the totality of the organized minority. Regarding the political formula, this legal and moral basis is what we call the political formula. They answer a real need in man's social nature, and this need, so universally felt, of governing and knowing that one is governed not on the basis of mere material or intellectual force, but on the basis of a moral principle, has beyond any doubt a practical and a real importance. On representation, what happens in other forms of government, namely, that an organized minority imposes its will on the disorganized majority, happens also and to perfection, whatever the appearances to the contrary, under the representative system. The truth is that the representative has himself elected by the voters. And on liberal concerns with pure democracy, I am opposed to pure democracy precisely because I am a liberal. When, instead, political power originates from a single source, even if this be elections with universal suffrage, I regard it as dangerous and liable to become oppressive. These passages capture the reasoning without romanticizing power or promising utopias. They highlight constants. Organization trumps numbers. Formulas provide moral cover for force. Balance prevents tyranny. Wrapping up, engaging with Mosca's framework sharpens our logical grasp of society, revealing why minority rule persists, why violence in redistribution undermines consent-based morals, and why balance through voluntary elements offers the best bulwark against decline. It encourages reasoning from facts over formulas, fostering awareness that true progress lies in maximizing circulation, juridical safeguards, and spaces for informed, consensual action rather than coercive overhauls that breed new imbalances. Keep questioning the structures around us. Stay unruled. Stay moral. Stay free.